Did ancient people predict solar eclipses? You might think that they spent all their time staring up at the sky, tracking the movements of celestial objects, and making detailed predictions about when the next solar eclipse would occur. But were they actually able to do this? Well, some of them were. Thousands of years ago, people would have witnessed an eclipse and believed that the gods were angry. Some cultures created myths and legends about these events, while others developed sophisticated methods to track and predict them. Here are some examples of how different ancient societies attempted to predict solar eclipses. In ancient Babylon, people kept meticulous records of astronomical events, including solar eclipses. The Babylonians were among the first to notice that solar eclipses occurred in cycles, and they developed a system to track them. They recorded the dates of eclipses that occurred during their lifetime and passed down their knowledge to future generations. This allowed the Babylonians to accurately predict solar eclipses hundreds of years into the future. Their records also helped astronomers today understand how solar eclipses have changed over time. For example, the Babylonians recorded an increase in the frequency of solar eclipses around 750 BC. This increase in frequency may have been due to changes in the tilt of the Earth's axis, which can cause the length of a year to change by up to several days. These changes can then affect the timing of solar and lunar eclipses. The ancient Greeks were one of the first cultures to use math to predict solar eclipses. They observed that the moon always passed between the Earth and the sun during an eclipse, which allowed them to calculate the size of the moon and the distance between the Earth and the moon. They also developed a method to predict when solar eclipses would occur based on the phases of the moon. While their predictions were not always accurate, they were surprisingly close. In fact, the Greek astronomer Ptolemy was able to predict a solar eclipse that occurred in 138 BC with an error of only 2 hours. This level of accuracy was unheard of at the time, and it paved the way for future astronomers to study and predict eclipses more accurately. The Mayans were an ancient civilization that lived in what is now Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize. They had a deep knowledge of astronomy and used it to make predictions about important events such as solar eclipses. The Mayans believed that eclipses were a sign from the gods, and they used their knowledge of astronomy to try to predict when these events would occur. They also used eclipses to help them keep their calendar in sync with the solar year. The Mayans kept detailed records of eclipses and other astronomical events, and they passed this knowledge down to future generations through stories and artwork. This allowed the Mayan culture to maintain a sophisticated understanding of astronomy for centuries. The ancient Chinese were also skilled astronomers who kept careful records of the positions of the stars and planets. They used this knowledge to develop a calendar and to predict astronomical events such as solar eclipses. The Chinese believed that solar eclipses were a bad omen, and they took steps to avoid them. For example, they built large walls around cities to keep evil spirits out. They also made sacrifices to the gods to appease them and prevent future eclipses. Despite these efforts, solar eclipses continued to occur, and the Chinese eventually learned to accept them as a natural phenomenon. While some ancient myths about solar eclipses may have been based on superstition and fear, many civilizations had a real scientific knowledge of astronomy and were able to make surprisingly accurate predictions about when eclipses would occur. The ancient Greeks, Babylonians, Mayans, and Chinese were some of the first cultures to track and predict solar eclipses using mathematical calculations and observations of the night sky. They proved that humans could read the sky long before modern science, and their discoveries paved the way for future astronomers to study and understand these fascinating phenomena. So the next time you look up at the sky and see a solar eclipse, remember that you are part of a long line of stargazers who have been fascinated by these events for thousands of years.